Welcome and thank you for joining us today. This is Bottom-Up Approaches to Violence Prevention. Your moderator today is Jody van der Heide, Inspire Working Group Global Coordinator, ISS. Please keep your microphones and cameras turned off until we reach the question and answer portion for today's event. The question and answer session will be conducted using both the chat function and the raise hand function on your Zoom application. To access the chat function, kindly scroll to the bottom of your Zoom application, click on the chat button, and a chat box will appear. Should you wish to raise your hand, kindly click on the reactions button to access the raise hand function. During the question and answer session, the moderator will acknowledge you, and you will have to unmute your own microphone and turn your own camera on to make your comment or ask your question. Please note that we will evaluate this event using an online poll. The evaluation is completely anonymous, and it helps us to present better events in future. Kindly do take a moment to complete it. It'll be launched following the presentations portion for today's event. As we wait for our final participants to connect their audio, we kindly remind you to please keep your microphones muted and your cameras turned off until we reach the Q&A portion for today. Please also note that since this is a public event being broadcast live on YouTube, Chatham House Rule does not apply. This is Bottom-Up Approaches to Violence Prevention. Jody, you have the floor.
Good morning to our online audience. Welcome to this morning's seminar on bottom-up approaches to violence prevention. My name is Jody van der Heide. I'm a research consultant in the Justice and Violence Prevention Program at the ISS, and also the coordinator of the Inspire Working Group. This year, the Institute for Security Studies and the Inspire Working Group has jointly hosted a series of 4 online seminars relating to Inspire, the 7 strategies for ending violence against children. Inspire is the leading technical evidence-based package to support countries in their efforts to respond and prevent violence against children. This seminar of today is the last one of the year, and we will continue to host quarterly seminars throughout 2024. For today's seminar, we will be discussing and exploring bottom-up or local level interventions to prevent violence. These are interventions that engage with the community at a grassroots level. These interventions are grounded or embedded in the communities that they are implemented in, and this is really important because in doing so, they are deliberately tailored and responsive to the specific needs of the community. Local level interventions also value community knowledge. Often, bottom-up or local level interventions will partner with organizations or key stakeholders in the community to achieve community-wide buy-in, collective support, and strengthen the response to better able meet the objectives of the program. These approaches often aim to empower local actors and foster a sense of community and ownership in the program. We are very grateful to have 2 experts with us today who will each share a case study of a local level violence prevention intervention. And although these 2 case studies are quite different from each other, we will see that the intention is that we can see that violence can be prevented in many different ways. The hope is that we will learn about how these case studies or interventions work, what does it achieve, how does it work, what are the challenges and the opportunities, and some lessons learned going forward. We will be together for the next hour and a half, and we intend the next 90 minutes to really be a discussion, and we encourage engagement from the audience. In terms of how we will structure the conversation, each speaker will present for about 10 to 15 minutes, and after that, I will open up to the floor for a longer Q&A session. Please feel free to pop your questions or comments in the chat as the presenters are speaking, and I will then refer to them at a later stage. With that, I would like to introduce our first speaker. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Barbara Haltman. Barbara is a feminist urban safety and development practitioner who developed the What It Looks Like When It's Fixed methodology for collaboration in addressing complex social problems, and this was an output of her PhD thesis. She is a director of the consulting company Fixed, focusing on strengthening government policy and responses to vulnerability and fragility. particularly for women and girls, community safety and development. Barbara, when you are ready, please go ahead and share your presentation. Great. Sorry, Barbara, I think you are on mute.
Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about this today. This is part of a series of local interventions that involve partnership of one kind or another, and it was commissioned by GIZ. And we've just loved doing these case studies because it's been an opportunity to really engage with people who usually work in quite a small, tight area, and you don't necessarily know that things are happening where they do happen. So the Touws-Ranton case, which is one which is closely related to the ISS, in fact, is I'm sorry, is one that is of particular interest, I think, because it addresses something that is so very South African, which is our inability to speak with each other across different sectors, opinions, beliefs, political affiliations, and socioeconomic status, that very often we live very close to each other, and yet we find it very difficult to talk with one another in circumstances in which we can have a creative and constructive outcome. And so I've been particularly fascinated by this this case study. It's about no, it won't move. Oh, there we go. It's about two communities called Hoekville and Touws-Ranton, and the way that they developed a community dialogue. And the first thing I want to say is that a fascinating thing for me is that community dialogue is a formal methodology. It's not just communities having dialogues. It's actually a formal methodology in which people choose to have a particular focus for their conversation, in which they choose to have committed participants in these dialogues, and where the communications, where the dialogues are actually facilitated in such a way that there's a major effort undertaken to overcome the issues of hierarchy, which are very, very often hugely difficult. Who can speak? The politics of communication. Who can speak? Who will be heard and by whom? Whose issues are more important than other people's issues? How do we choose what issues we should all focus on together as a group? And I think that in this particular case in Hoekville and Touws-Ranton, it's very typical that Hoekville is an area that is quite well resourced and is more established, whereas Touws-Ranton is a much poorer community and includes also an informal township. And they're very, very close geographically. But prior to this intervention, it would be false to say that they were close in terms of community. And so that's the other word that we need to look at, is what does community mean? Are we a community because we live within a certain range of each other? Or are we a community because we take an interest in each other, because we go to the same schools, because we shop at the same shops, because we have the same socioeconomic issues, because we live in the same beautiful place? Or is it because we choose to be a community? How do we actually make that work? And of course, there are other issues that make us a community. Are we regarded by, for instance, local government as a community? Are we treated as a one group because of our geographic position? So the dialogues the community dialogues that have been happening in Hoekville and Touws-Ranton have been, I think there've been 21 so far, and the dialogue meets once a month for an hour and a half, and they discuss issues that affect safety and prosperity, and they seek to find solutions. So that sounds simple enough, but of course it's not, because the problems are so very varied, and because historically we tend not to believe that other people regard our problems as important as their own problems. And we also tend not to know that much about each other's problems. And so it's very important that we look at this very formally. So it's a very intentional building relationship between people of Hooksville and Touwsranten, and sharing knowledge, getting to know each other. And the meetings are conducted in English and Afrikaans. And I think it's very important to talk about language. Language is also a very big part of hierarchy. What language is spoken, which actual language is spoken, plays a very big part in who will speak and in who will be heard. It also plays a very big part to look at the kinds of words that are used. Are people patronizing? Do they use words because they assume that other people don't have the language that they're speaking in? And so are they patronizing and speak in very simple language? Are they superior and talk in very complex language? How do we ensure that language is not a barrier to our conversations? And I think also the speed of speaking is very important. I've been doing some work in Europe over the last few years, and I've been trying to learn French. And it's all very well when you're sitting on your app, but when you actually get into a meeting in France and someone hits it at full pace, you're like, didn't hear a word they said. And I think that that's a very important thing. We all speak at different at different speeds and with different shortcuts. And so we need to learn about each other. And one of the ways that of course can be done is to develop a glossary and to ensure that everybody knows everybody's words. So community dialogue is convened by a representative group of people who bring and maintain the richness of diverse voices and commitment to positive change in the community. And in this particular instance, you'll see that there's a group of personalities that everybody in the area, we are told, will recognize. Under Siwe, who's been researching the project, Major General Oswald Reddy, who many of us know from many different places in the country, who played a very important role in bringing the police into the process. And I'll mention him again later in terms of adding to information about rights, information that is easily digestible by people who are not sure of their rights. Herman Reiter, Dr. Herman Reiter, who has done this fantastic project, who is doing this fantastic project in the public health sector that looks at the problem of child drug abuse and alcohol abuse from a parental perspective. And I just love that. I mean, everything that this program and that the violence prevention program as a whole has looked at over the last several years has told us that parenting is something that we miss so dreadfully in South Africa, that in many cases, young women get pregnant by mistake and they are forced into motherhood at a time when they are neither prepared nor supported to do those essential 1,000 first days that look at bonding and attachment and make both mother and child safer in the family unit. And Herman's work looking at an Icelandic model that addresses the habits of parents and identifies for them what is actually important in terms of the way that children follow what their parents do, and has shown that a reduction of drinking by parents, for instance, dramatically reduces the amount of drinking that happens with children and underage teenagers. And we know that the younger children normalize drinking, the more likely they are to have a problem with it later on in life. And we find that, I mean, in fact, the latest statistics that I read at a conference that Dr. Reiter and I were both at was that if a child if alcohol is normalized for a child at 13, they have a 38% chance, greater than the average, of struggling with alcohol later on in life. And so if we can persuade our children, our parents, that it is in their hands for children not to actually suffer those risks, then how wonderful is that? Captain Mona Hiernes, who has been a most fantastic support for the project from the George Police. Wendy Mentor, the Human Settlements Manager of the George Municipality, about whom I will also tell you a story that there are two stories actually. There was a meeting to be held about some toilets that were needed by women in the informal settlement in Toosranten. And Wendy said, but I did offer intermediary toilets, chemical toilets, because we didn't have the budget to do the whole thing. And someone told me that they would burn them down if we gave them to them. And Wendy told me this in an interview in a really quite casual way. And it struck me that it is something that we really need to address. We have come to accept that that's the way we'll talk to each other. And yet, as long as we talk to each other, we get not very far at all. Wendy came to a later meeting. There was load shedding, and for once it was a good thing, because the meeting was held on the veranda of the local community hall. And as a result, people saw that there was a meeting and people came. And the conversation became much more constructive. And as a result, you will see a little later the beautiful toilets that Wendy managed to build. And also to begin that conversation about how do we start to compromise? How does dialogue help us compromise? How does dialogue help us get closer to what we need without making really mindless threats about burning things down or about our unhappiness about what we do? I think it's something that if we can't change it in South Africa, then we are constantly taking steps backwards. Sharon Apples and Ross Diamonds are both parents and residents of the community, both of whom do an enormous amount of work in terms of convening and following up and providing secretariat services. And then there's Chandre, who is from the ISS, and of course gives the whole initiative a somewhat unfair advantage in that she has extraordinary knowledge and experience of local interventions for safety. But the fantastic thing about Chandre is that she has participated in this process, not just as Chandre Gould from ISS, but as Chandre, a neighbor. And I think that's so fantastic. And in all the local case studies that we have been engaged in through this GIS Municipal Case Studies project, we have found the Chandres. We have found the people who bring particular expertise that helps other people understand the value of good practice, of solid practice, of using methodology that has been proven, of not just thinking that a good idea is going to solve everything, of understanding the need for collaboration and working together. And so there are others in that community, but we choose to mention just those for this moment. Values and ways in which people will communicate. And this is particularly important since we have social media. It's fantastic to have a baseline of things that we're actually committed to and that we agree to. Because that way, when people don't behave with respect, when people don't behave with active listening or deep democracy or empathy, and I would add compassion, in fact. I think everything we do in South Africa needs to start with compassion. We can refer back to this simple set of rules of engagement, and we can say, hold on a minute, this is not the way we do things. This is the way we do things, and we need to do them like that if we are to achieve something of real value. So here, this is a success story about the toilets, the women who came from the informal settlement and showed us the before, And then Wendy and the team, through the dialogue, who came to this extraordinary outcome on the right, which is not only toilets, but also wash basins, and is highly regarded and respected by the community, but does so much more. It does so much more than just provide these women with a safe and clean sanitation. What it does is it sends a very loud message right across the community that we care. We all care for one another. And that's really what it's about. And sometimes when we have to engage with stories of vigilantism, when we have to engage of stories of terrible security interventions, I come back to this and I think, when we are the eyes and ears for our communities, and in Brixton, which is another one of our case studies, when we are the eyes and ears of the community and even the eyes and ears of the police, it's not necessarily to find the criminals. It's to find the people whose needs could be met in such a way that we create a sense of belonging and caring within our community. And this, for me, is something that is just as important. There was a woman in Brixton who said to me about the Brixton Light Festival and about the art classes for the children, many of them children of migrants, many of them children with no formal lives at all, that they came on a Saturday. She said they come for the food and they stay for the art. But she said the thing about it is that if any one of them wants to take the wrong path, one of us here in this community will see them and we'll call them back and we will offer them a better path. And I think that's, for me, what the eyes and ears mean, rather than the eyes and ears of police or anyone else. And to not think, I remember once a very long time ago in a workshop in Hammanskraal, we asked everybody why they were in the room. It was also a community-based intervention. We said, why are you in the room? And when we got to the policeman, he said, I'm in the room because it's my job to stop every child from becoming a criminal. And in my very worst performance as a facilitator, I leapt to my feet and said, no, that's not right. You're here to ensure that every child lives their best possible life. You're not here to expect them to be criminals. You're here to expect them to be heroes. You're here to expect them to have something fabulous to offer in the community. And I think that this kind of community intervention does exactly that. So I've told you already about the toilets. And then there's some wonderful stuff here about, challenges in which, for instance, there's a really scary security company in Wilderness 7 kilometers down the road. And whereas people used to move very freely and easily between the different communities, and many women from the township would go and work for holiday makers or people in the wilderness, you would suddenly find that they were being stopped and asked to leave the area by the Wilderness Defense Force, as it was called. And this caused an enormous amount of problem. I mean, people who were going to do handiwork, people who were selling things, people who were wanting to engage with the only place that there is real opportunity within walking distance was suddenly being stopped from that. And so with the help of Major Reddy, some documents were made that could go onto WhatsApps so that people understood their rights. And people could actually say, no, sorry, you can't do this to me because I have the right to walk these streets. Or they could come and get help from wherever they needed it because that information was now available. So I think, the use of WhatsApps and the use of beautiful materials on WhatsApps is absolutely great, except that we know from just about every community-based intervention that we ever engage in, we know that WhatsApp groups can be horrible, that they can be racist, that they can be blaming, that they can say the most terrible things. I was once threatened on our local neighborhood WhatsApp that I was like a seal, a baby seal waiting on a beach waiting to be clubbed because I didn't want to close the suburb. So we know that WhatsApp groups can be absolutely terrible. And what's happened here is that although sometimes they can be divisive and offensive, we keep going back to the principles. We have something to go back to and say, if you don't communicate with respect, if you don't communicate with empathy, if you don't demonstrate your commitment to the group, then this WhatsApp group will not actually succeed. One of the other communities that we worked in had 4 WhatsApp groups so that they could always default to another WhatsApp group if somebody behaved badly, which was really nice because it was like a really silent way of saying, we're continuing. You can join the conversation, but not with that comment. But they didn't have to deal with it. And so it really does have to be curated and looked after. And Chandra and Andiswa, in this case, monitor the group and ensure that there is a response to the queries. And now many people who didn't previously participate do, and you have the Ratepayers Association, for instance, who are part of it. So that's just a very quick, and I mean, really, I could talk about Toes-Ranton for days because it's just such a wonderful story of how when people come together and they do something that has value, they can really make a massive difference to the safety within their community. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for that lovely presentation. I think you made a number of very important insights and you really highlighted kind of the key elements of what makes the community dialogue work. I really like how you spoke about how the dialogue really is quite deliberate in trying to disrupt hierarchies of power and rank. And oftentimes in the spaces that we move, the power is not always visible. It's kind of that invisible power that shows up in position or status or rank, and calling that out and flipping that on its head is equally important in addressing violence and creating safety. So I think that was really important. And even the idea of language as shifting power, making it accessible, sometimes being aware that we don't want to speak in heavy academic jargon that renders it inaccessible to people in the audience is another way. So really small ways of, creating an exclusive space is very important. Thank you so much. I'm sure there are a couple of questions and thoughts. Please go ahead and pop them in the chat. And if there is anyone in the audience that participates in the dialogue, in the community dialogue, we would love to hear your thoughts in the Q&A session. But please hold on to that after our next speaker. So with that, I would like to introduce our second speaker for this morning. So it is my pleasure to introduce Lindo Mkhize, who serves as a project manager at the Wildlife Environmental Society of South Africa in Durban. He has a rich background of 6 years in project implementation and facilitation. His focus lies in environmental education, sustainable tourism, and youth development programs. And all of this is directed towards the imperative goal of fostering sustainable development in the country. He has significant expertise in program implementation and draws upon his extensive experience to underscore the paramount importance of sustainable development. Like I said, he firmly believes in the concept of meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the needs of the future generation, particularly in the realms of environmental conservation and the welfare of its inhabitants. Lindo, please go ahead when you are ready and share your presentation, and Lindo will share his experiences of the Child Safe project. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Can you see my screen now?
It seems we can see your screen, but I don't think the slide has loaded fully. But it might be if you share the power if you click on PowerPoint mode.
Oh, yes. Just one second. Okay, can you see everything now?
There we go. Perfect.
Technicalities, I know we prepared. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lindo Mkize. Or in short, you can call me Lindo. As introduced, I'm with the Wildlife Environment Society of South Africa, focusing on the Child Safe Project. Very interesting project for me, and I'll show you why I say it's an interesting project. So, as we all, or some of you may know, we are the environmental society with more than 90 years or 95 years of environmental conservation, protection, education for sustainable development, and as well as many different initiatives that involve people. As we call ourselves, the people caring for the earth, our mission is to educate, advocate, and act. Basically, our vision is to be the trusted and highly effective organization working for environmental and social justice, also in creating a healthy and sustainable planet. Now, with this project, the Child Safe Project, it fits very well with social justice, and you will see why. Okay, so where did we start? I know a lot of people might be asking themselves that when we speak about a social project like this, a social welfare project like this, WESA is an environmental organization. How does the two fit? But as you can see, WESA is the implementer of the Blue Flag program. This is an eco-label from the Federation of Environmental Education, which is an eco-label that looks at the sustainability and the upkeep of beaches and the accreditation of Blue Flag beaches in South Africa. When you look at this criteria in which is required when municipalities across Southern Africa voluntarily apply to be part of this program, before we assess and basically accredit this certificate to them, there are 33 criteria that we look forward to. And I'll just talk about the main ones, which is we look at water quality, the safety of it. We look at environmental education. We look at obviously the safety element of this, and as well as generally looking at the environmental education or the environmental management side of things. So when we looked particularly at the safety, we look at lifeguards, we look at security, we look at police presence in those particular sites. Now imagine a beach and you have the lifeguards, the police services, and law enforcement looking at visitors, looking at the water, protecting people that are coming there. We then looked at who protects people that aren't visitors or people that are there, in this case, kids and children. Then we looked at trying to create safe spaces within these blue flag areas or pilot status beaches or full status beaches. How do we create those safe environments for everyone who comes there and also have eyes behind where lifeguard wouldn't see, for example? We looked at Friends International because they run many different initiatives related to child protection and protection for humanity in that sense. And then we looked at one of the key programs, which is the Child Safe Movement, which brings together the community in terms of protecting and working towards protecting children in their communities. So how was then WESA going to be able to support this or run this when we don't have a social welfare background? We know the environment, we know how to best implement the Blue Flag programs and many different environmental programs across South Africa, be it at the coast or inland. But we needed people that know this work. We needed to find people that understand this work and obviously to fund this work. So we approached World Childhood Foundation because we had an idea and a concept that, hey, what if we implemented the Child Safe movement where we involve stakeholders in the community, meaning that we don't have to basically find people outside of their confines to assist us in working with this? How do we model a child safe movement that is working perfectly? I wouldn't say perfectly, but working beautifully in communities in Asia, Southeast Asia, and many other countries. Then we approached our local superheroes, IK, who share the same idea and have a very similar model of operation as what Friends International works in implementing the child safe movement. So we basically complemented these two programs or two organizations complemented our goal of creating safe spaces. IK basically is an organization that works to remove kids or street children, you may call it, from the streets, offering them a chance, another chance at life, either reuniting, helping them move away from drugs, the sexual violence that happens to them at the beach, and many other things that as South Africans and at large in the community know that kids or people that live on the streets are subjected to many different things that shouldn't be even happening to them. So IK was the expert in this. So we approached them as well and said, how would we best supplement or contribute to the work that you do in working towards achieving this idea of creating safe spaces within the areas that we deem important for tourism and obviously for the livelihoods in the community. So these are all our partners that we decided to tie hands and work together. So basically, the Child Safe Project hopes to create safe spaces for children that are at risk from abuse, violence, and many other things in the Durban beachfront here in South Africa. Currently, the focus is in Durban. However, in the first year of operation, we expanded it throughout the 3 provinces in which we have our Blue Flag sites, which is the Western Cape, in the Eastern Cape as well as Durban. But we found that in Durban, there was much more need and focus with the number of reported cases of violence that happened towards children there. So the program not only benefits those vulnerable children, as well as their families, as they would, obviously, the kids would be taken through reunifications, but also parent trainings happen before that reunification process happens. So IK is very well connected with regards to working with children and different stakeholders like the Department of Social Development, because if you work with kids or children, any cases of removing or housing will have to be authorized by the social development. So that particular network and the particular cohesion that IK has with this department is actually a beautiful one, because it means all of the work that we are doing is very necessary and as well as legal. Okay. So through the Blue Flag program, this project has developed an ancillary to further involve the community by creating a network of like-minded stakeholders in safeguarding and child protection. One of the things that are beautiful about this program is we also recruited working with the local traders that we find at the beach, who also are concerned of the different issues that they face as traders, and as well as they are concerned because majority of them are mothers. They have their uncles, their aunties. They see everything that happens there, and obviously it does not sit well with them because it affects their business, it affects tourism, it affects so many things that one may overlook. But when we pitched this idea to them, they basically welcomed it with open arms to say, hey, we've been wondering how can we even engage this issue? Because automatically when you talk about visiting the beach in Durban, you think about what about, there's a special term, it's a derogative term that is commonly used, and South Africans would know this, is that children or people that live on the streets are called paras. And that name automatically instills fear. So we needed to see how do we increase the community participation in this, and also how do we change the minds with people who engage with us in terms of, let's not look at these children and people as menace to society, but what went wrong. The idea and the adoption that the approach rather that we use, or IK uses, is the fact that there's a relationship building stage in terms of finding out how come are you here on the street? What went wrong? How do we help you in terms of getting back to your home and being a child again? Because a lot of them, once they are at the streets, it automatically a child becomes an adult because they need to fend for themselves. They need to find food. They need to fend the other adults who obviously want different things from them, and it's not a good place. You as an adult would not want that for yourself. Imagine a child now being exposed to that. So all of this requires change in policy. So the big part of this work means that there's a lot of community and stakeholder engagement in the local government aspect, and as well as private sector engagement, where we try to rally up how do we create like-minded stakeholders to work towards this, be it in the tourism sector, because as much as tourists, everybody wants tourists to come to our spaces, but there are good and bad tourists, both local and international. Now, if we have a community that is up there and aware of all these things, it's easy to identify because, for example, the local car guards who are part of the agents that we use or work with, they know everything. They will tell you, oh no, that car is quite common here. They are local. They start to pick up the trends very easily. They see a newcomer, they basically know everything. So they're able to spot ill behavior directly towards the kids, especially when there's new kids that come to the specific sites. So we also try to measure our impact because a lot of this work is impact driven, if I may put it that way. We only started focusing directly on Durban last year, where we decided that, hey, we needed to have childhood agents. Training happened. And currently we have a 63% successful intervention rate based on the kids or children that were found on those particular sites. Now, this is an 8-kilometer stretch of Durban's Golden Mile, and the back areas, which we call the catchment areas. So with these numbers, my approach has always been one child at a time. So this is a win. I see this as a win because it means the more we gather up, the more participation and commitment we get from local stakeholders, government stakeholders. It means that there will be an end to the violence against children. As you may have seen, my last 3 slides, that there is those top left corner is end violence against children, those small cards. You'll see what it means a bit later on. So basically, the child safe agents that work with us offer direct assistance to the outreach team because they are able to see, for example, kids that end up in the streets. If there's a new boy or somebody that they're looking for, they are always the first ones to actually contact the outreach officers to say, hey, I found a new boy. He's this description and whatnot. We have a local WhatsApp group that we share any news, or if something needs to be reported, and it gets shared on that particular WhatsApp group. Okay, so this is the 7 tips for travelers that we developed specifically for South Africa. If you may go onto the site, the Child Safe Movement, Child on Friends International, you'll see that every region has developed their own. But for us here in South Africa, we thought of the 7 tips for travelers being: number 1, children need supervision to remain safe. As you know, Durban beaches get quite congested during festive season. And it's very important that the public is aware that your kids need to be supervised and you need to see where they are at all times. And basically that children pay a price for your generosity. We often see a lot of people finding these kids on the street corners and giving them money and not knowing that that particular change that you think you're giving them to get them off the streets is actually keeping them there. And basically do not do drugs. We often found that holiday makers wanting a good time, now they have a child with them, leaving their kids with their, what happens generally here in Durban is that each beach area has a specific spot where you can able to tag or a parent's number on their child. For example, if the child gets lost, then you know you're able to collect the child from a specific area. So parents were actually deliberately losing their kids and hoping that I'll get somebody to look after my child for a certain period of time, and then I'll collect them end of my holiday. So that was the idea behind. So there's many other cases that I can go on about here. But more than anything, this was just designed to influence change in behavior and how we see kids and how we protect children, even if it's not your own child, when visiting our beaches or in South Africa. And we're basically hoping to replicate this in the different provinces as well, because we think it's a really great initiative that is still in the works. I mean, we do have many different challenges that we face in terms of the engagement that we'd like to see this project going, the support that we want from government, our local government. And yeah, it's still new in a sense that every time I have to be in a meeting with someone, I still need to explain through and through. And with the different changes in authorities and personnel, it makes it quite difficult because there is no chain or motion that carries on. So aside from that, we want to replicate it into other areas as well, not particularly the beaches, because there is a need for this, where the community is very much involved in protecting their kids, and to stop the traffic where people or kids themselves see the beach area as a place where to get money, and then, you know, so yeah. So, in educating and advocating and acting, we hope to educate the public about the importance of child protection. We hope to advocate for keeping children safe in South Africa for sustainable livelihood, and basically inviting everyone to act while we still have time. And let's keep our children safe. Let's be child safe travelers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda, for that great presentation. I have many questions that I will hold on to. I really love how, in the project, you and your team were deliberate about involving the local actors. You said like the local traders and the car guards, because they know exactly what is going on, and they almost have like inside information that people who are not there all the time simply will not have access to. And that is really, important in developing this project. And it's also part of the idea that safety, creating safety for children, is everybody's responsibility. It's adults' responsibility. So thank you so much for that. I would
Definitely.
now like to open up the floor to our online audience for any questions or comments. Please pop it in the chat. Alternatively, you can use the raise hand function and then unmute yourself and put your camera on if you would like. Um, we have about 40 minutes for questions and comments, reflections. So please go ahead there. And then I will read the questions off the chat or ask you to unmute if you raise your hand. So please feel free to ask our panelists any questions that you might have. I think I'll start off, Linda, for you. As you were speaking, I realized that the festive season is starting and the beaches in Durban, like you said, get really, really packed. And I was just wondering how do you prepare for that? Um, just dealing with the sheer number of people that are going to be at the beach in December this year.
Um, Honestly, it is quite it's quite a lot, honestly. However, normally there are different activations that are run by the city, um, to basically reassure the public that safety measures are in place, in terms of safety. Law enforcement, the officials, SAPS always have a rally in which they also apply that, and as well as the local a metro, which is part of the municipality, and as well as law enforcement agencies, as well as security services around Durban. There's a high presence of that. So I know the entire coastline has different entry points in which there will be law enforcement stationed at those entry points. There are those are good entry points where automatically when the public enter into those zones, they are aware of the law enforcement. So it's quite reassuring when that happens. I wish it would happen throughout, honestly. However, there's always the human element to it in terms of operations. However, we always jump on those rallying points in terms of also pushing our awareness in terms of creating, say, that safety element into making sure that people are aware of all those elements. And also the agents themselves are people who are aware of the fact that they need tourism to work for them because they basically sustaining their lives here. And um, just having that network of people who really want the same thing actually helps. So I wouldn't say you can ever prepare enough. It's huge. It's quite huge, but to a point where we're still finding more ways in terms of how do we access people coming from the inland provinces to Durban, and as well as that's why it's very important to rally the local guys here. Let them be the advocates. Let this project be theirs and not just Western's iCares and World Childhood Foundation.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Please pop your questions in the chat or raise your hand. Barbara, if I could ask you a question. In the case studies of the community dialogue, did you come across any challenges that the community dialogue grapples with, either in terms of what they are thinking about or in terms of process and how it functions? Anything that maybe was challenging at some point?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the biggest challenge, is one that Linda's just actually referred to in a way, which is that the communities where we work are almost inevitably communities that suffer high levels of violence and thoughtless behavior, quite often because of the circumstances. As I say, we should always start with compassion. But so I think in the case studies that we've looked at in Touwsrivier, one of them was that there was a very high level of interpersonal violence there, and I just absolutely love the way that they addressed it, which was to explore what violence means to the adults in the community. Again, trying to avert violence against children, but also to being able to stop children from thinking that violence is the way to go. And I think that, again, what Linda talked about children on the streets and children whose only lesson at a very young age is that if I stand on the street corner and look sad, somebody's going to give me money, or I'm going to earn some money some way that is not good, is a really terrible tragedy of our society, because we are the custodians of our children. And so in Touwsrivier, when they started having conversations about what is violence and how violence was not just about hitting someone, but violence was about treating people with disrespect, about shouting. I mean, the research that's come out recently about the impact on children of abusive language and of being shouted at and being told that they're worthless, being told that they're useless. And in so many families, this is what kids hear, either about themselves or about some of the adults in the family. Even in the intergenerational family group, that people who are perhaps people with disabilities or people who are elderly are regarded as people who are problematic, and we don't have to actually treat them well because they're an issue. They're something we don't want to deal with. And so I think, just looking at the sign that you made there of what you want people not to do and what you want people to do. I mean, for me, because of my what it looks like when it's fixed approach, I would always say, can't we put some questions related to that sign to add to what else we'd like you to do with children? Can we expand that signboard so that in the end there are more things we'd like you to do than things we wouldn't like you to do? And I mean, and I know that's really, really difficult. And we once had a really quite annoying American woman come and talk to us about our public spaces, and she was very rude about how the parks tell you what not to do in park signboards tell you what not to do. I know that our society requires rules. I know that we're not talking about some nice, neat park in Washington, D.C. But I think that maybe we can think of more things. And when we prompt people to do nice things with kids, like find out where they're going, give them directions, ask them where their parents are, ask them, that if we make everybody an agent for change, not just the people that have the training, then children begin to think that they're being watched in a much more positive way, in a much more constructive way. And we begin to understand that we have a role to play. And one of the things that I think, I was the other evening on a talk show about the guy who killed that drug dealer in a vigilante action, who is alleged to have killed the drug dealer in a vigilante action. And what struck me was how many people called in and said, yeah, but because I said, look, we don't have the death penalty in South Africa, so you can't go around killing drug dealers. It's, that's not, it was our choice as a society to give up on one of the most brutal elements of apartheid, which was the death penalty. So you simply can't go around and kill people because you think they've committed crimes. Yes, but then how can we help to make crime better? And I think part of that, again, Jody, comes back to the language issue, where we talk a lot about fighting crime. We talk a lot about taking up arms against criminals. We talk a lot about, about arresting criminals, punishing criminals. But what about preventing criminality? What about actually being the eyes and ears that say, here is a risky situation? And I think, Linda, that's a lot of what your fabulous project is doing, is saying, this is a risky situation. And we need to be able to create the capacity to protect those children. But what's more fabulous about it, even than protecting the children, is that in doing so, we make ourselves helpful. And we are a society with huge mental health issues. And a lot of those mental health issues come from our sense of uselessness, our sense of overwhelm, the sense that we can't actually make it better because it's too big. It's too big. It's too awful. If I don't get a gun and shoot somebody, I'm not actually being useful. Whereas, in fact, every single one of us that alerts someone else to a risk, that helps somebody else get from A to B, that saves somebody from somebody who has bad intentions, is exercising our agency and making us a safer community. And I think that's what I absolutely love about really integrative local projects, is that they find roles for everyone. You don't have to be, in Brixton, there's a guy who's a town planner who's absolutely marvelous at working with the Brixton Light Festival because he knows exactly how to deal with the municipality and exactly how to get the right cooperation. There's a woman who makes the most wonderful art out of recycled goods. Absolutely marvelous. And she teaches the kids to do it. And in the process, develops a relationship with the reclaimers and the children and the environment. People with these skills have things that they can specifically do. But you and me, an average person walking down the beach road in Durban, what can we do? We can keep our eyes open. We can actually say, hey, little one, seems to me you're all on your own. Where are you going? Where are you coming from? Can I help? Can I connect you to somebody from Linda's program who can actually help you get back to safety? And I think for us to encourage people to do things like that is just such a wonderful way to begin to change our state of mind in South Africa. And the other thing, Jody, which I know that you know is a big thing for me, is bottom up or top down. As far as I'm concerned, we have been socialized to believe that what we do at local level is bottom up. But it's not true. We are at the top of a very shaky upside down pyramid. Our pyramid is constantly floating around and sometimes it falls over altogether. And who should be at the bottom holding us is government. National government should be visible only in what it achieves with us at the top of the pyramid as the community that matters the most, because they don't matter without us. If there's no community to serve, government doesn't matter. They don't need to govern themselves, and let's face it, they very often don't. What we need to do is we need to say, at the bottom of the pyramid, there needs to be people who are committed to the stuff that we as community members are not committed to, and we don't understand. We're not bureaucrats. We don't necessarily understand how to make policy. We don't have the mechanisms to communicate in a huge feedback loop with the people at the top. We have commitments that come from a statutory framework that takes us up to the next level, which is provincial government, and then takes us up to local government, who stand next to us at the top of this pyramid that needs to find a comfortable and safe base. And on that basis, we need to start talking about what we know. Linda, you have told us so much about what you know, about what happens at local level in KwaZulu-Natal. You know it. Why doesn't national government know it? Why doesn't provincial government know it? Why doesn't local government know it? Because they think that you're at the bottom of the pyramid. They think you've gone down to local level, whereas in fact what you're doing is going up to local level, to the things that really matter. And I want to propose that in future we call community interventions top-down interventions, and we explain it every single time to government. And that maybe we start by that means to be able to intervene in a much more confident way with government by explaining to them what we know, rather than waiting for them to ask us questions that very often have been designed in an academic setting and that are not necessarily the ones we know the answers to, plus which they're not necessarily the things they can do something about. So with safety audits, for instance, they'll ask hundreds of questions, but in the end, they can only do something about 10 of the answers. And I think we need to shift that. And that's my impassioned plea for the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I mean, I completely agree with, again, just the way that we frame things is so important. And I wonder if I could ask, when you said that you pitched this idea, or not pitched, but you've mentioned this idea to government about going from bottom up and changing it to top down, what was the response like?
The response is often quite good, but they don't. But we come back to, how do you get from chief director to minister? Right. How do you get from chief director to DG? How do you get from Safer Cities manager to city manager, and actually, make that a formal proposal? And I guess it's the gap. It's the gap between, in this case, everybody always says in South Africa, we've got great policy, our implementation is terrible. My experience with local interventions is that they're not terrible. They're fabulous. They just need to be expanded. They need to be formalized and expanded. They need to be linked to appropriate policy and implemented widespread. Imagine, Linda, if your project was implemented in every venue in South Africa where there were children. And I think maybe that's something. I mean, I would love to see that as an actual project that perhaps as a coalition of players we were to undertake, to look at how this would fit into that policy and how we could actually get it into a much more public space. Because people, the people who deliver the services are often, they say absolutely right. I don't want to be. I mean, I remember once flying to a workshop for social development in the Eastern Cape. And we arrived there, and the chief director who had commissioned the workshop, there was a message on my phone to say the minister needs me somewhere else today. And so there she was with all her knowledge, with all her need for this workshop, with all the expense of putting it together, with flying us to get there, with us needing to provide a report without a key player being there. And I said to her, why can't you say, no, I can't let my stakeholders down? And I know, because I worked for a minister, that it's unbelievably hard to say that. But if we can't get to a point where we can say that to our ministers, then we are always going to be at their mercy. And I really think it's time we changed that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the pressure that government officials experience and the demands that they make, and you kind of just have to jump when they say jump. Really, it's a problem and a concern that I mean I've seen it in the work as well. I
Terrible,
see.
and it's a waste of capacity. It's
Yeah,
a terrible waste of capacity, air tickets. You know, it's like, because the minister will say, I need you in Cape Town tomorrow, and then something else will come up for the minister, but you're so unimportant, he won't bother to tell you that you're no longer needed in Cape Town. I mean, I've seen that happen with somebody that we all know very well. So, you know, yeah.
thanks, Barbara. We have a really great comment and question from Lorenzo Andrews. Really great presentation from the two panelists. Both spoke extensively about community engagement, but when getting the community involved, did the projects rely on the goodwill of individuals or were there incentives involved? Linda, for example, when you engaging with the local traders and the car guards, how did that go?
Yeah. So that for us, for me and the team, it was, I would say, easy, but also a bit challenging because look, South Africa has, through the different initiatives, and I'm not saying they are bad, but also it sort of conditions a person to expect some sort of incentive if you're going to be helping. However, we were able to put it in such a way that um, they understand the severity of having a society that isn't safe. Because, for example, if your area in which you're trying to trade and make means is not safe, you're not gonna get any visitors. You're not gonna get anybody buying your craft, as good and as unique as it may be. But the word spreads quickly. If a tourist from Germany knows that that particular site isn't safe for me, you can forget about that. So it was an approach where I first got complaints that the city is not doing this. We're facing these issues, and for me it was a step of how do we start to make it better. We need solid foundations first for people to be able to jump on and assist in terms of, hey, at least there is something happening there. There is this network trying to achieve this. By doing that, you are able to sort of create a snowball effect in terms of people coming in to support the work that you've already started. So after that, that's where some of the ladies and gentlemen started committing themselves that, hey, I really do. Sales have really went down post-COVID, and the fact that there's a lot of people struggling to find jobs. So everybody is trying to sell something. We have this issue. We are just not selling anything. Shift focus. Now people are starting to see that no, if we're able to keep our spaces safe, that means trading will commence, and then somehow, yeah. So there was no incentives that have been given to people. We just viewed them as beneficiaries themselves because some people started coming forward and say, hey, listen, my cousin has the same issue. A child X has these issues, they're into drugs. Can I get them involved in this particular program? And then we had one boy who was in the rehab or restoration facility, was able to, get assistance through that via that network. So we see them as beneficiaries more than, yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Linda. I think that's a really important point about creating understanding of how this entire program actually also benefits the local actors as well, not so much in addition to the child. I think that's a really important point. Barbara, and in your knowledge of the community dialogue, oh, sorry, before you answer the question, you will see that the poll has just popped up. It should take 30 seconds to complete it if you don't mind. It helps us to get a better sense of your experience of today's event and to plan better events in the future. If you could please take a moment to complete it, or you could even just shift it to the side of your screen. Sorry, Barbara. And in terms of your knowledge of the community dialogue, how did the community get involved? Was there incentives or again, just relying on the goodwill of the individuals involved?
I think, I mean, just as I've said, I think there always needs to be a what I call a government botherer, somebody who's good at dealing with local government and who likes it. I mean, there are people who just absolutely love bothering government. And I think there should be one on every project. You need to find somebody who is prepared to actually keep going and keep going. And in exactly the same way, I think every initiative needs to have at least the hope of some kind of direct recompense. I think that there needs to be a fundraising element to every intervention, even if it's very small. You know, another thing that creates a hierarchy is the ability to provide a plate of sandwiches. And so if there is a way of actually creating a fund to use for emergencies and to use for teas and to use for transport, then I think that's only fair. I mean, we live in a society in which many people are desperately poor and where they really can't afford it. They can't afford anything outside of what they got. And they probably come to the meeting in the evening without having had anything for lunch. And so for me, that issue is a really important one. I mean, I quoted Lucy Msomi saying, they come for the food, but they stay for the art. And I can also quote Chandra saying, I think that these days, even if we didn't have sandwiches, people would come to the meeting. Food is an important issue. It is an incentive to attend a meeting. It is an incentive that is quite big if you haven't eaten anything today. And I think that that's something that we really need to bear in mind. I also think that some of us can afford to volunteer, others cannot. And so that needs to be dealt with in a transparent way. If I want you to participate, but you tell me that you cannot because you can't afford to, then I need to offer you some kind of hope that we'll work together to make it something that you'll be paid for. I don't, you know, I think there's a certain amount of kind of superiority about volunteering. And I think we really need to smash it on the head because, oh, sorry, that's really violent. Because I think for many people, it's an embarrassment and it's a problem. And you know, so many people who can't afford to do enormous numbers of things for their communities, for their children, etc. And it's really interesting, you know, that idea of being able to sell craft, of being able to do jobs. I mean, one thing that I remember from quite a long time ago, and I think and has been replicated here, although I think it wasn't intended as a replication, is that on the WhatsApp group in the Toes-Ranton group, jobs are also advertised. If there's a local government job, if there's a domestic job, if there's a painting job, if there's a gardening job, if there's a driving job, whatever it is, advertise it through the communications forum, because there is no reason for people not to actually benefit financially from work that they do within this setting. And I think there is an enormous amount of goodwill. I mean, if I look at somewhere like Brixton, if I look at El Cairo Park in Hillbrow and the amount of personal goodwill that goes into that work, it's amazing. But there is also a paid coordinator in the El Cairo Park version. In Brixton, they add it all up and try and find some sponsors so that it's not only people who can afford to who can participate, it's everyone. And I think inclusion is such an incredibly valuable part of the Hookville Toes Ranton project that, you know, I really believe that and it shouldn't remain silent. It should be a conversation you have right at the beginning. Is this going to be problematic? How are we going to actually make this fair? Because is it fair that I can take $100 out of my wallet when you can't? Is that fair? And how do we actually make that work?
Absolutely. That's such an incredible insight. Thanks, Barbara. We have 10 minutes left. I will encourage you to add any final questions you have on the chat. And if there are members of the community dialogue, you can share your thoughts, anything that you would like to add in addition as well. I see we have another question from someone joining from Livingstone, Zambia. Thank you for joining. Is there any chance of extending such programs outside the borders of South Africa? I know, Linda, you mentioned that at one point it was in different provinces of South Africa, but I guess one day would it be the dream to extend it outside of South Africa for you?
Yes, definitely. The child safe movement, for example, is one that is growing in many different parts of countries in basically in Asia, and it is replicated or it's adapted to how the society and what is it that you want to respond on. It's literally using or getting assistance and community participation to be involved in child protection. The model is very clear. It involves community, it involves the government or authorities, if I might put, because in different parts of the world, things don't often work as how it works here in South Africa. For example, I was in Cambodia, where I actively saw it work in two different cities, coastal city and as well as inland. So it definitely is something that can really replicated anyway and can work for you. There are organizations really looking to fund this type of work that you can engage. And yeah, because it's very important. It's very important work.
Absolutely. I love that it's in other parts of the world as well. And I think we could have a whole nother webinar just on how that adaptation process works. Because it's that in itself is a whole different pot of tea. And then
yes. Or whatever you drink locally. Jody, I'd add to that. That Livingstone, of course, is also a hugely tourist destination, where there are tourist providers across the board, from the huge hotels to the tiny camps, and the families of people who live there. And I think just to say that GIZ will be publishing all the case studies that we've worked on and are working on, and we'll be finished that by the end of the first quarter next year. And the fabulous thing about the way that people have shared with us, Siyakantu, is that nobody has said, you can't share this. This is our copyright. You can't do this. Everybody has said, you're going to write a case study about our intervention. How fantastic. How wonderful if everybody else will actually follow suit and engage. And certainly, we will always be extremely happy to hear from you if there's any way in which we can assist.
Absolutely. That's such a good way to close, Barbara. Please feel free to reach out to our speakers. I'm sure they won't mind. If you have any further questions or ideas or potential collaborations or partnerships, that's also what we love to use these webinars for. I have popped two websites in the chat. The first is the Violence Prevention Forum's website, where you can learn a little bit more about the dialogue forum that Barbara has spoken about, as well as the provincial and national violence prevention forums, and the Inspire website that showcases evidence-based solutions to prevent violence against children. Lindo, could I ask if you could pop Wes's website in the chat for people who are looking for more information? As well as Barbara, I know your consultancy is called Fixed Africa. If you could also pop that in the chat for people who are looking for additional information. And I don't think there are any final questions. I'll just wait for those two links in the chat before we close. There we go. There we go. Thank you so much. And I think with that, we can wrap up for today. Thank you so much to our audience for joining, for participating. Hope that you found it insightful and useful, that you can use a little bit of this in your work. Please feel free to contact me with any other information. And thank you so very much to Barbara and Linda for taking the time to present and for showcasing your work. And thank you so much for the important work that you do in your organizations as well.
Thank you so much.
We will see you all at the next webinar. Be on the lookout for that. That will start again next year. And have a lovely day, everyone.